Welcome, guys. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us to kind of walk through our takeaways from the Marketing Sherpa conference this past year. The agenda is pretty short and sweet. We're going to go through introductions. We'll introduce ourselves. From there, we're going to walk through the top 6 takeaways from the conference. And then in the end, we'll kind of go through a summary section and then open it up for questions from you guys. As Daniel mentioned, you guys have the capability to insert your questions in the chat box, and we'll try to address those as they arise at the end of the call. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Matthew Ramos. I have worked for What Counts for about 3 years now. I have about 7 years of email marketing experience working at other ESPs as well as associations. My experience runs the gambit from entertainment to e-commerce to finance and software as a service. I'm excited to be at What Counts, and I look forward to walking through this webinar with you guys.
Hi, I'm Katie Thomas. I am the Director of Customer Success on the East Coast out of our Baltimore office, and I kind of edge out Matthew just by a year. I've been here 4 years. I've been in account management or customer success since 2004 with a large focus on higher education. And, you know, when I'm not working on emails or working here at What Counts, I love to eat food and spend time with family and friends. So really looking forward to sharing with you the stuff that we learned during Marketing Sherpa, and we'll go ahead and get kicked off.
Perfect. Thanks, Katie. So I have the first step, and that's basically that people buy from people, not marketers. I think that this was the main theme of the entire conference, and I think the main takeaway that we really want you guys to focus in on is the idea that as a marketer and as an individual that really kind of focuses on your particular brand and your marketing agenda, we really kind of lose sight of the fact that we're actually a buyer first. And we really need to kind of reshift focus back to that. We have essentially a blind spot where we're actually taking a marketer's point of view and not really the buyer's perspective. So I really kind of encourage you guys to focus and reshift that back to the buyer's perspective and make sure you're looking at your overall marketing channel from a buyer's perspective. One of the ways you can actually do that is by kind of creating a story that connects to a problem or a need for a consumer and justify why they need to convert with your brand. And when I say convert, I mean convert from whether it's signing up for a webinar, whether it's signing up for a newsletter, whether it's actually signing up for a service, or whether it's even purchasing a product. We know that we have a variation of clients that we work with. We want you guys to kind of get a general idea that this isn't specific to e-com, this is across the board. One of the examples that I have personally in my own life is that I like to work out. That's one of my hobbies. And my gym actually goes through and creates these cool little YouTube videos. And the YouTube videos speak to me as an actual consumer, as a person who works out on a regular basis. And it kind of, it talks to how I want to interact in my daily life, and, you know, whether I have kids or whether I just really want to be fit to run my next marathon, that type of thing. So really the whole thing is you kind of take a look at your brand and create a story that resonates across the board. Another really good brand that does this is Under Armour. I don't know if you guys have seen the viral video that's going around with Michael Phelps. It's a really passionate video about how he works out all hours of the day to be prepared for the Olympics. And that's a really good example of how you can kind of create a story that resonates with your particular brand and goes above and beyond just kind of looking at things from a marketing perspective and looking at things from a buyer's perspective.
Yeah, Under Armour is actually headquartered here in Baltimore, Maryland, and that video is a really inspiring one, the one that Matthew had mentioned. It's all about what you do in the dark is what makes you who you are. In that case, what makes Michael Phelps the amazing swimmer that he is. So let's talk about another subset of marketers that you have at your fingertips that you don't even have to pay them. They're your social media followers. If you think about it, every time they comment or engage with your post, it shows up in their feed, therefore being shared with whoever is in their social network. So it's kind of like they're inherently marketing your product and your company. So let those customers, let those social media followers speak for you. They can be some of your best salespeople. And if, as you know, referrals are always better than a cold call. So some ways to be successful with social media marketing is, know your audience. And at the same time, know that you don't have to be a part of every single social media network that's out there. So kind of pick and choose based off of your audience and their needs and where they're having the conversations. And along with that, make sure you're building relationships with them. It is social media for a reason. You want to have a conversation, be social with them. There's an opportunity to engage and respond back to their posts and their comments. And more often than not, there are other people who are watching how you're engaging and will be influenced by that. So if you think about the Carnival Cruise company a couple years ago, they had a major issue. And they were direct responding on social media, and it actually was received very positively, and it showed a lot of transparency within their organization. Additionally, you want to identify opportunities to thread social throughout. So look at other ways that you communicate with your customers, and how can you add social to those communication points. You could, if you send out a package to someone, you could put in a postcard with a hashtag, or ask them to kind of share their product with a specific hashtag. Bonus tip, it also generates some user content for you, and that you can save and use in another place. And at the end of the day, the main point of this is to remember that people buy from people, not from marketers, and they want the truth behind that sale. So the second tip is all about habits or routine. So let's go ahead to the next slide and kind of take a look at a habit. So we have what's called the habit loop, and this was one of the presentations that was presented during MarketingSherpa that I really enjoyed. So while you're reading over that quote, let's think about it. So our brains like to go on autopilot is essentially kind of what that quote is speaking to. And we can all relate. Think about how many times you were driving and all of a sudden you ended up halfway to work. You just went into autopilot. You went into a habit. We've all done it. Don't be ashamed. It's okay. So breaking down that habit loop, we have three pieces: the cue, the routine, and the reward. The cue is a trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode. It's usually a visual cue. And then the routine can be an actual, what you're actually doing. So the triggered behavior. Then the reward is what helps your brain figure out if this loop is worth remembering for the future, and therefore creating a habit. So let's talk about some general habits that we have. We all know the successful CEO. For example, not to bring up Under Armour again, but I was talking with one of the execs there, and he was talking about how every morning he wakes up and runs every day. We all know these C-level folks are these very powerful, accomplished folks. So his cue is the alarm. He wakes up and runs 5 miles every weekday, and he starts his day off with a sense of accomplishment. And working out is probably one of the habits that we make all the time. It's probably one of the most talked about New Year's resolution, and probably one of those habits we break a lot. So creating a cue, a routine, and then a reward. You might not think to eat a snack or a piece of chocolate or candy at the end, but to put some sort of reinforcement in there can help you make that habit stick. Also, getting in shape is kind of what we call one of those keystone habits, and basically it's where it impacts other habits. Generally, people who work out eat healthier, therefore sleep better, get to work earlier, feel less stressed. It has a big impact on a lot of other habits within our life. Digital engagement. So studies have shown that there's a psychological impact of social media on our brains. It can trigger that sense of feeling loved, if you will. So the cue would be that badge icon or notification on your phone, then checking your social media sites like Facebook or Instagram, and then the reward is you feel updated. There's no FOMO or fear of missing out. And then one interesting case study was all about a clean house. So there was a company we all know, Febreze. They came up with a really amazing product. It takes the smell out of stuff. So they thought, they knew they had a winner here. So they created this ad where the cue was Grandpa's stinky old chair. The routine was to spray Febreze, and then the reward was there was no smell, everybody wanted to sit in the chair. So they tested this with their audience, and it failed miserably. So they went back to their research and started looking at that, and they realized that the reward is not that there's no longer a smell, but the reward is actually that it smells great, fresh. So they went back to the labs and actually put a scent into Febreze, and then once they launched it, so the cue was a dirty house, you clean, and then you spray Febreze, and then the reward is you smell your home, and it smells great and smells clean. All right, so taking that, what are some of the habits your customers have? So good habits can be hard to form and bad ones can be hard to break. But if you know how they work, you'll have an easier time making them work for you. So in order to determine what habits your customers have, you need to look at both the qualitative and quantitative data. So qualitative data can be asking them to keep a diary, having some informal conversations with them, or usability studies where you watch how they engage, say, with your website. And then quantitative data is obviously those metrics, like looking at the actions and engagements and looking at all of the metrics behind it. So using that data, you can learn what the cue and the rewards are. So together, the cue and the rewards are what kind of create the habit. It's basically what creates that sense of anticipation and craving to make you want to do that routine. So previously I talked about exercising more. So choosing a cue, such as going to the gym as soon as you wake up, and a reward such as a smoothie after each workout. And then think about that smoothie or that reward while you're working out, and allow yourself to anticipate that reward, and eventually creating a craving that will make it easier to go to the gym every day, and make it easier to make it a habit. So another example in here is the unread email notification. You're reading your email, you see a coupon, and then therefore you save money. So Groupon, for example, long before the company came along, if you wanted to find, if you were looking for a product, which would be your cue, or you saw a product, you would scour the internet, which would be your routine, in order to find a killer deal, which would be your reward. So Groupon succeeded in modifying the habits because they simplified the routine. So instead of scouring the web, users can check a single site for aggregated deals. So the cue is the same, the reward is the same, but just a little bit, the routine to get there is a little bit better. So just overall, it's a pretty simple process if you think about it, and one that the brain easily responds to. In a previous slide, I had a stat on there, and basically one paper published by Duke University showed that more than 40% of our time is habitual action. So it's something that we naturally want to do. So when you're going to think about it, just try to figure out what the cue is and that reward is, and then therefore you can make a new routine for your customers.
So the next topic we're going to talk about is to justify the open, and that's kind of a larger theme here. So one of the things that I really want you to conceptualize, and this was actually featured in one of the blogs that Katie and I wrote, is the idea of identifying a micro yes versus a macro yes. And the goal here is for us to ultimately get to that macro yes, right? However, we really have to kind of stage it out and identify exactly how we get there. And the first step is to get an open. From an email marketing perspective, our goal is for them to see actually who it's from, see the subject line, see if it's relevant and pertains to them, gain the open. From there, we're actually taking a look at the overall content, how it's laid out, the clear call to action. From there, we're getting them to click. Once we gain the click, we're actually having them visit the website, whether it's to gain more information about the product or service you have to offer, whether it's to fill out specific information or actually asking them to do something. They're taking time out of their day to actually review what you have to offer and then move forward with the next step. Once they've done that, whether it's fill out information, perhaps after you fill out information, then a call is received. We have a couple customers who do that today. And then from there, once the call's been received from the actual consumer, they have the option of whether or not they actually want to convert and whether they want to provide their credit card. So really, the whole idea I want you to kind of take away from this particular slide is that we're really kind of focusing on micro yeses first to actually get to the macro yes. So with that justify the open piece, I want you to kind of take a look at your own email experiences. We really need to think about how you interact with your own personal inbox. Remember, kind of taking a look at people buy from people, not from marketers. How do you engage with your own personal email? What gets you to open? What are the brands that you open most often from? And kind of identify, oh, it's brand loyalty, most likely. Maybe it's a good offer to Katie's point. Maybe it's a specific cue to Katie's point. So you're kind of taking a look at that. And then from there, you're also taking a look at how you engage with your work inbox. I have several customers who their main client base is actually people who are in office, who are actually at a computer working from 9 to 5, and they need to get people to open during that time frame too. So you kind of have to like take your overall business experience into play as well, but of course from buyer's perspective. So really here, my goal is to kind of take a look at subject lines and kind of identify how you justify an open. And we have several different examples. They do a great job of actually kind of identifying some examples in MarketingSherpa, and I've listed some out here for you. And you just, again, one thing that I've already mentioned before is that you really have to identify that you're taking time out of that person's schedule, right? You're actually asking them to interact with your brand. So there's a cost there. And every time I take a look at my own work inbox, every time I look at my own personal inbox, I really have to identify, is this relevant to me? Is this email important? Is this an urgent email? I actually have queues set up in my own work inbox where if I'm getting an email from my boss, whether I'm getting an email from Katie, whether I'm getting an email from my team members, that type of thing, that are flagged a little bit higher so I know where my priority is. And that's kind of where we have a frame of mind when we look at email. So really, and I apologize about the bullets, but really we kind of take a look at this. So the first category is like requested information. So again, at the end of this this actual session, we're recording it. We're going to send out a recorded link to you guys. So you guys will have this for reference. And so our subject line is going to call attention to that. We want you to open. We want you to engage. From there, perhaps maybe there's an order. So woohoo, we got your order. We're acknowledging the fact you actually placed an order online. It's very pertinent, very relevant. I'm justifying that open. From a customer service experience, you're taking a look at important information. We've updated our legal policies. So if we've updated our legal policies on our website, it's our job to make sure that you're aware of that. And then important information about like specific tools or features that are relevant to you, that's another thing that's going to get you to engage. Any problems, like you're actually responding to a service issue. Katie mentioned something about Carnival Cruises actually engaging from a social perspective on their website, or on their Facebook page, excuse me, and their website. It's the same thing with email. I had a terrible experience with Alaska Airlines over the holidays, and they sent me an email the next day that specifically referenced that issue and actually gave me a credit for my next flight, and I actually used that. So that's a really positive experience, and it's really engaging overall. Taking a look at things from a unique opportunity. So registering, again, for webinars, registering for newsletters, that type of thing. Any affiliate connections, kind of thanking them for their business, their service, that type of thing. And then also like kind of providing those overall, opportunities to receive those rewards for any loyalty programs. Loyalty programs, as you guys know, are big. I mean, they're a big opener. They're a big draw for people to engage with your overall brand. So really, you have to take a look at the subject line and make sure, really ask that question, is the subject line justifying why I want them to open? Am I going to receive that micro yes? Another way to take a look at it is connecting to a problem. Does your subject line connect to a problem? Is the cost of the problem being addressed? So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the brand QBs, but it's an interesting brand. Make a mental note to kind of take a look at it. It's kind of cool. But needless to say, they drew my attention because they're actually basically creating a sense of urgency here. The prevalence of a problem, taking a look at a particular problem. There's meetups sending too many emails, and they're addressing that. They know that. They know their engagement's probably low because they're oversaturating their inbox or people's inboxes, and so they're addressing that. They're taking note of that, and that's specific. That's relevant to me as a subscriber. I'm going to take note of that. The difficulty of a problem. So I'm addressing the difficulty of problem of internet speed. How is your internet doing? How is the speed performing? How any service that you're actually receiving, your gym membership, that type of thing. People are checking in to see how your gym membership is going, how your classes are going. And the newness of a problem, a feature, super helpful feature that's being promoted. And then, of course, and my apologies, this is a little bit messed up on this slide, but humanity of the problem. How likely are you to recommend Try the World to a friend? So, like, it's kind of drawing off of your own experiences, and are you likely to say, you know what, I'm gonna recommend one of my friends to try this service. The next thing I want to take a look at, above and beyond justifying the send, looking at a subject line and kind of identifying that you're addressing a problem or justifying the send, is actually the construction of your overall subject line. And the reason I'm focusing so much attention on the subject line is because that's the first step. From an email marketing perspective, that's our window, that's our door in to get their attention. And there's studies been shown, and I'll give credit to Mech Labs and MarketingSherpa. They've done a lot of research. If you guys have never been to one of their conferences, obviously this is about MarketingSherpa. I'm going to plug it. It's phenomenal. They do a great job of putting their conference together. But they did a great job of kind of taking a look at the construction of sentences. They looked at point first, point middle, and point last subject lines. And that's basically what's the gist? What's the point of this subject line? Why are you sending this to me? And so it's basically kind of taking a look at what's the overall objective. And the customer-centric logic is when structuring a point-first sentence, one must ensure that the point conveys the customer's get. What are they getting before it conveys the company's ask? So what are they going to get? What are they getting from this? So if we take a look at some examples here, you'll see after studies have been done that the top performers actually have that point first. What's the get at the beginning of the subject line? So in addition to justifying the send, in addition to actually addressing any particular problem, and I'm not going to say you have to justify the send and address the problem at the same time. A lot of times they overlap, obviously. You're not going to be able to do both of them at the same time and a point first. I don't want you guys to get too confused with that. I just want you guys to basically conceptualize the overall thought around a subject line. From there, I want to kind of take a look at these. So I took an old subject line and then I kind of optimized it. It's like, what is the get? What are we doing here? What's the whole point of the subject line? The get is you're going to get rewarded. You're going to get rewarded for activating your cash bonus today. That's my get. That's going to get my attention. It's going to draw me away from what I'm currently doing right now, whether I'm on my phone engaging with my email, or whether I'm at work and probably supposed to be working and I've been distracted. I'm going to go in and activate my cashback bonus now because I want to get my rewards. I want to make sure that I'm getting those because I deserve them. And then from there, let's take a look at the other one, which is the old subject line, the free gourmet. Like, you're kind of you're restructuring your sentences to actually have that point first. You're ordering now. And this particular subject line creates a sense of urgency. And I want to clarify, not all subject lines are actually going to follow this format, but this is the overall thought. You kind of have to reframe your mind and your thinking when it comes to subject lines. In addition to that, we take a look at the reply to and from addresses. I'll tell you some really cool brands that actually do this well today is Gap. I don't know if any of you guys on the phone engage with Gap. But Gap actually has a lot of their emails coming from their creative designers these days because they actually want to engage from that design level. They want to make sure that you understand where their concepts came from. J.Crew does the same thing. But needless to say, it's actually taking a look and personalizing the actual message and making sure it's coming from a real person and not necessarily from a batch email address. I'm going to clarify, you can't do this for every campaign. I know that, and I certainly understand that. But you have to look at what the overall message is, what's the point of the message, what's the point of the subject line, and identify who that message should come from. So when we need a message to come from a higher level executive at our organization, we send it from our CEO. You know, and Alan's on that reply to and from address. Like, you know, he's in there. It's specifically a personal message from him. Daniel sent messages, you know, to our subscribers and our customers as well. Mark Piggott's done the same thing. So you're kind of taking that personalized touch, and personalized messages actually do perform better. So going into the next topic, which is testing. So I've thrown several concepts at you right now. The point first, justifying the send, taking a look at a problem. I know you guys probably have several different triggered campaigns you're working on today, and you're like, you know what, maybe I need to go in and restructure my subject line based off of what I've learned today. Well, I think if you're going to make any sort of change, you've got to make sure that you're testing that change. And I think the concept that I want to make very, very, very clear is that any and every topic that we had a part in at MarketingSherpa there was some sort of testing component to it. I really think if you're not testing your content, testing your subject lines, testing your landing pages, testing your website, you're missing out. I think that needs to be a part of your overall marketing initiative 2016 and beyond. Testing is vital to the success of your overall business and making incremental changes. And again, I go back to my comment earlier about people buy from people, not from marketers. So we make assumptions. We assume. We do it all the time. We assume that a customer is going to behave with this particular email this certain way. It's like, oh, I know based off of best practices it's going to work this way. Yeah, best practices are a great guiding post, but at the end of the day, it comes down to testing to make sure it's working well for your audience. So one of the things, and I want to share this particular example, is that there was a particular customer, and I'm sure you guys can probably gain who they are by the actual message, but they basically took their header nav bar, which is normally obviously in the header of a message, like their nav bar, and then moved it down to the footer. So they just wanted to test that simple concept. And that's actually one thing that I did fail to note on the previous slide, is test small things. Don't test your from address and a change to the subject line and a content change all at the same time, because you're going to skew your results. You're not going to know what's actually increasing your clicks. You actually have to go through and test small. And you know, I went through this deck with one of my team members, and my team member mentioned, well, you're changing the icons too. Well, yeah, of course, we're changing the icons a little bit because we just don't want like blank text down below. But really the concept is the same, which is essentially we're taking the header nav and we're moving it down into the footer of the message. And the one thing that we learned here is that, perhaps the clicks, because if you guys have done any sort of heat map analysis on your programs, you guys all know, and you're probably all scared about this, like, oh, I don't want to do that because my top performer, one of my top performers in the top 5 URLs that's clicked in my email is from my header. It's like, I don't want to, take away from the click opportunities. Well, the reality, though, is in most cases, you're actually not wanting them just to click. You're wanting them to convert, right? So you may take a hit from a click perspective, but in the end, actually increase your conversions. So sometimes you have to kind of shift your analysis and kind of look at it from a different perspective. Are your conversions actually doing well versus your actual clicks? Another thing, and I've done this with one of my customers. They've actually, I'll give them credit because they may be on the phone, but they actually put together a really solid plan around subject line testing. And it was a very simple concept. They want to know if personalization performs better than non-personalization. And the thing here is that they actually tested it over and over and over again. That's another thing that I encourage you to do. Don't test it once, test it multiple times. Make sure you come up with a thorough hypothesis. That's another thing that I see often. It's like, oh, we made a content change, oh, we tested it once, oh, it didn't really perform as well as I had hoped because, you know, our old template actually performed better. And it's like, well, you only tested it once. And there are a lot of factors to testing too. You may have sent it at a different time of day, seasonality, that type of thing. So it's really important for you to actually test your concept multiple times. And in this particular case, we were able to identify a clear winner with personalization. So this is just a simple concept that you can go in and actually test. From there, I've heard several rebuttals regarding testing. Like, well, you know, if we test, my goal is to make sure that the revenue increases, definitely does not decrease, that for sure. I'm afraid if my clicks are affected, what happens? Well, you know, I encourage you to kind of take a look at testing from a different perspective. So maybe you don't take your entire file and mail, you know, a test to it. You know, I think it's ideal, but if you can't do that, start smaller. Test based off of, like, if you're doing a content change, you're doing a call to action change, if you're changing your header nav to your footer, and you don't want to affect your conversions or you don't want to affect your clicks, take the people who have opened but really haven't clicked. Take the people who've opened who really haven't clicked, use that as your segmentation and go through and test off of that. See if that incremental change actually does in fact get them to click. It's again, testing that small little change. From there, you also have the capability to go through and, you know, you're acquiring, hopefully you're doing a great job of acquisition, you're acquiring new records. So if you're acquiring new records, you can actually go in and test based off of that new audience as well. Going back to Katie's point around habit and cues, yeah, I mean, and a lot of times you're actually, you're probably going to get familiar with the old newsletter, the old layout. Where do I get something, especially if you're used to a service? You're going to go, you may open the email and go, well, I don't know, I mean, my call to action moved. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean, because you may have a lower click rate on your test, that really that's a true test and that's the end-all be-all. You can go through and test off of new records. I go back to my original point a moment ago where I said test multiple times. It's going to be give you a better overall result with your test, but you can test with your new audience as well. Have them go through the welcome series, set them aside, and then do a test based off of that. And then I think the easiest solution, personally, is to take your audience and split it active versus inactive. And that gives you the capability, gives you a better engagement on your overall performance. Because from a deliverability perspective, and this is a whole different topic, you want to make sure that you're not mailing unengaged recipients anyways. And sometimes you don't really have a choice. Your director is saying, I need to mail everyone on file. That doesn't mean you have to mail them all in the same audience. Split them. And you can do tests off of that inactive audience as well as an active audience. So there's several different ways you can test. So I encourage you to look at testing from a different perspective and not just say, oh, you know what, I don't have time, or, oh, really it's not even my wheelhouse right now, and I don't want to affect my overall conversions and the revenue that we're gaining on a daily or monthly or even annual basis.
All right, so let's go into our fifth point, and to kind of echo what Matthew said about the conference. One of the great things about it was not only did it go into great detail about email, which Matthew just shared through testing, and but it also talked about digital marketing as a whole. As we know, email is a piece of the pie, so it's kind of important to look at all aspects of that. So going on to the next slide, I have a couple of great quotes here. I know it can be hard to read, so I'm going to go ahead and read through them. First quote, wonder what your customer really wants, ask, don't tell. Talk to your customers, find out what they need, don't pay attention to the competition, they're not relevant to you. And then the final quote, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. So I think it's important to know that every good conversation starts with listening. And as you'll see on the next slide, there are multiple ways in which you can listen. So as the first quote said, you can ask them, but also you have to listen to their response. But you can also look at the data. And you can learn by what they are, quote unquote, telling you by the way that they engage with your content. How are they responding to the information that you're putting out there, the marketing pieces that you're putting out there. And when you have those conversations with them, it's important to ask them the right questions. And another way that you can kind of start figuring out where to communicate to them through is to look at the pieces that you're currently communicating to them with. So you can conduct a communications audit. So when you do this, you'll want to look at all the pieces that you use to communicate to your customer base, identify the medium, whether it's print, web, email, social, etc. What is the overall purpose or intent of that piece? What is the audience, the frequency, and the quantity? And then what are the metrics behind those? So by doing that and looking at that big picture, it will help you identify gaps, see where you have too much or too often, and also help you see which pieces are being responded the best. So I'm going to go through a few case studies that were shared with us during the conference. And the first case study is from a company called SAP. They are a huge organization. If you don't know anything about them, they're basically the market leader in enterprise application software, working with Fortune 500 companies and other multinational corporations that have complicated supply and customer chains and helping them overcome those complexities. So what was the main issue that SAP had faced? So essentially they had uncoordinated marketing activities that were creating a lack of customer intimacy. So in order to tackle this challenge, they created what was called account-based marketing, which was essentially a strategic approach to business marketing. They were looking at all of the different ways that they can and could communicate with the customer and then creating a plan to focus on that customer as markets of one. So they took a look at internal and external information, determined what their model would be, and then built out the specific steps. And instead of just launching it, as what Matthew had talked about previously, they tested it first in order to secure internal momentum. So for that pilot program, that test program, they looked at the growth potential of each account, what the sales engagement was, and the customer commitment. And then they built out the customer program. And then in terms of the listening, they talked to their customers about what their vision was, what were their goals, and they listened to them and then create a customer plan or an account-based marketing plan. And mapped out a custom program on how they would market to that customer and over the course of a year. And not only do they include the normal type of outreaches, but they also included some personal sponsorship type activities. So some of the results that they experienced are that they doubled their new pipeline, they doubled their marketing progress pipeline, and doubled their marketing touch pipeline, as well as increased their new line of business contacts by 18%. So the next case study is from Optum, and it was all about customer first marketing. So listening to what the customer wants and kind of responding to them and giving them what they want. And how they generated closed contract revenue of $52 for every dollar that they invested. So Optum's challenge was that there was a big gap in understanding prospects and their industry. So in order to do that, they needed to build out the personas of those C-levels, the C-suite in which they wanted to engage with and to sell to. So they conducted research. One tip that they shared was they said that they asked for 15 to 20-minute conversations instead of 30 minutes. For whatever reason with the C levels, it was received very well. We all know they're busy people and they don't have a lot of time. So remember some of those questions I had brought up on the listen slide? Those were the kinds of questions that Optum asked. They asked the questions, how do you want to be sold to? How do you like to consume content? So using what they heard, they used that data to create fact sheets for the sales team that included little nuggets of information to better arm their sales team in order to go out and sell to the C-suite. So they created these communication tools and then helped them better speak to their audience. And then taking that a step further, taking what they had heard, they also used that to create a higher quality content to continue to nurture their leads. So they learned that not everybody that comes in is someone that's going to convert. So they needed to continue to nurture them and nurture them with good content. And they generated what they called their content machine, which was constantly feeding content and then funneling the leads down different paths until it was ripe to be picked. Essentially building awareness and credibility. So all the while, they were keeping in mind through the content they were serving and through the fact sheets they provided to sales was this whole customer first marketing. And they learned that by no longer talking about themselves or their product, they were much more successful. So some of the results included, as that were shared during the conference, they might have changed at this point. Their pilot program, as I mentioned, generated $52 for every dollar invested. Their integrated campaign has generated over 6 million impressions, more than 6,500 downloads of gated content, and then more than 19 million in the sales pipeline and 6.7 million in closed business. So these two case studies are very specific to their own individual business. But essentially, they looked at the audience, they had conversations with them, they looked at the data, and learned from what they heard and used that to create a marketing program for that specific audience that was what they wanted and what they needed, not necessarily what the business wanted or the business needed.
So the last point that we want to kind of touch base on is kind of looking at marketing as a whole. You know, in addition to just email, I think we've mentioned this a couple different times throughout the presentation today, that the whole goal of email is to drive traffic to your site. So we can do a phenomenal job of making sure that they get the micro yes, or we get the micro yes at the open, we get the micro yes at the actual click when they're actually reviewing the content, the call to actions, doing its job and getting to the website. But then on the website, we're lost. We're confused. We don't necessarily know where we're supposed to go. So we really kind of have to take a look at the overall experience within the email marketing piece. That's really important for you to kind of grasp and understand as well. I'm sure you guys probably already know that, but this is just a gentle reminder. So really, we kind of look at making sure that your website is responding to the overall experience. If I'm engaging with your email on my phone and I click on that call to action, I expect your website to engage in the same manner. If it doesn't, it's going to be a confusing experience. There's going to be a disconnect. And I use this example. They had a really great example for a senior living facility who, actually it's not a facility, it's a website where you can go and get more information about senior living options like within the area. So like, you know, they're a service that provides this feature throughout the United States. So if I'm looking for a senior living facility for my mom who lives in Texas, I can go to their website and gain information. Well, as an active person who's always on the go, I may receive a call from my sister, and my sister's like, hey, we need to look into senior living facilities. I get on my phone and start doing some research. If the website's not really interacting well with me, it's lost my interest. I've moved on. I'm going to find something else. So the reality is you kind of have to take a look at the overall experience and kind of identify, you know, what would work best for your consumers. You know that millennials are your target demographic here who are helping their parents find a senior living facility where they can reside. So you're kind of looking at making sure that your website is responsive. That's not only that, like if I go home and I actually look at your website, I expect it to engage from a desktop perspective. That way there may be more options to me on the desktop versus the mobile version. Again, this has to do with testing. You want to make sure that you're testing things as well. Now, I want to clarify that responsive is not the end-all, be-all. You know, responsive is a great step because, again, if they're engaging with an email and they're going to the website, you want to make sure that there's no disconnect. But in addition to that, really you need to take a look at the overall experience of your website. And we encourage you kind of taking a look at getting some UI testers, user interface testers, or some user experience testers. You know, give them some sort of, you know, a gift card or cash incentive to come to your facility and kind of walk through their experience on your website and give you feedback, real-time feedback. And the questions that you really need to take a look at is the learnability of your website. Can your patrons easily find out what you do, what you have to offer? Like, what do you do? Is your homepage, or even the landing page for that matter, from an email, is it giving the right message that you want your subscriber or your visitor to hear? And from there, can they go through and research additional information rather easily? The memorability. Will your visitors remember your value proposition? How can you eliminate their problem? Will they remember that? Will they remember that you have access to a network of 50 different senior living facilities within the Dallas, Texas area? If they do, then that's a good sticking point. I'm going to go back to my sister and talk to her and say, hey, you know what? This is the site we need to be on. Can you go and take a look? And we can look at it together. So it's really kind of taking a look at the overall memorability of your website as well. And the efficiency. Is your website efficient and not verbose, or require too many steps to be answered, whether it's a form that you're requesting them to fill out? Is all of that information absolutely necessary before they receive a call from a representative? Really kind of taking a look at it and kind of identifying what's the core ask there. Again, getting that micro yes. But again, like, I mean, it's even your search box. A lot of times we take that for granted. Like site searches, you go through and you're like, I want to find this particular, if they have this particular feature. And you go through and you search for marketing automation on the What Counts website, you're going to find information about that. I mean, it's making sure that you're looking at it from an actual consumer perspective, the buyer's perspective, remember, buyer's perspective. And then additionally, taking a look at whether your website throws any errors. Looking at basic tasks. Again, I go back to that search feature. Am I going to get an error if I go through and search for something on the website? Am I going to get an error if I go to a particular landing page? What is it, you know, how does it interact when I go through and increase the font size? Because, you know, someone may not, may be visually impaired, and they need to, what does the website look like that? So it's really kind of taking a look at the overall website experience. And the last thing in this particular section rather, is kind of taking a look at maybe possibly exploring the idea of doing a questionnaire. So Survey Gizmo and SurveyMonkey, they actually have features where you can embed a survey on your website. So whether it's actually at the end of a purchase funnel, or whether it's after you know, a particular page, or whether it's after they filled out information, that type of thing. You're getting live feedback. 4C is another one. I don't know, you guys probably are very familiar with them. Anytime you ever go to Nordstrom.com, or anytime you ever go to Amazon, they have some sort of little pop-up that says, hey, are you willing to provide feedback? So that's really relevant. I mean, I don't necessarily feel that all the time. I do sometimes, most often when I feel really passionate about an experience, but it gives you that great feedback that you can use to optimize your website. So really, again, kind of to summarize this particular section, is to look at your website, your experience from a holistic perspective. Again, whether I'm coming to your website through an email, or whether I'm visiting your website through SEO, or something from your Facebook page, that type of thing, how does your website exist in general for that particular subscriber and that experience?
So in summary, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. So in summary, you kind of just want to reiterate some of these points that we've gone through. I know that we are about 5 minutes before the hour, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. That way we can open up the floor for any questions. But main point, and it's the most important, and Matthew and I have referenced this throughout, and basically people buy from people, not from marketers. So just remember at the end of the day to be a human being, and that they're buying from other people, and they don't always have to be marketed to in that sense. 2, determine the cues and the rewards in order to create new habits or routines. 3, justify the open to connect to a problem or story that's relevant and personal to the subscriber. 4, remember that testing is still alive, it's not dead. Test small and test often, and you always are working to increase that micro yes. 5, listen to your customers and really listen to them. And then 6, above and beyond email, thinking beyond that, outside of email, to create an overall well-rounded customer experience and to help you gain that macro yes and get them to convert. So that is kind of in summary of everything that we've talked about today. I know that